Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to The Only You, where we speak with Dr. Patino about some of the current issues out there. And today we're going to be discussing opioids, teens, in particular, this substance called fentanyl. And Doctor, you and I were chatting just quite literally 2 seconds before the show. First off, I would just explain what is fentanyl?
Well, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, and it's actually a medication. As a physician, I can prescribe fentanyl in the United States as a patch, as a 24-hour patch, for people to manage their pain, or you can prescribe it in tablets. But what happened is that in the last 5 to 10 years, fentanyl became an easy drug to produce. Formula wise is not that complicated, so it becomes easier for laboratories, clandestine laboratories, to create fentanyl, right? So it became a very available and accessible drug because it's not like marijuana. You have these large amounts, and this is like pills, right? And it comes in different colors, and unfortunately, the price has been going down. This is what usually happens with substances like this. First, they become available to those who can afford them and they're privileged with money, and then it becomes more easily accessible, and people can get them at a lower price. I mean, I can tell you because I see kids who overdose on fentanyl and don't die, right? Quite often because we need to detox them from opiates. And number one, all of them know somebody who's died from taking fentanyl, right?
Wow.
Uh, And used to give you some parameters, in the last year, there were approximately 100,000 deaths in the United States because of opioid overdose, right? That's tremendously high. Just to put it in context, in terms of deaths related to suicide, we have about 35 to 40,000 per year.
Mm.
So the deaths from fentanyl during COVID and after COVID just went exponentially higher. And I can tell you at least 2 years ago, a tablet of fentanyl was about $5 a piece, right? Today you can get it for two for $1.
Oh, wow.
So what has happened is that younger and younger kids are getting challenged, and there's some TikTok challenges recently with clonazepam. Well, they get challenged into, let's try this. Okay, the problem is that you can have little fentanyl or enough fentanyl in the pill to make you stop breathing.
And we were
So
you were just you were discussing that before the show. The biggest aspect that you said that's so crazy, it's like a Russian roulette, is that there's no consistency in the dosage. One pill can have a bunch of the active ingredient, another pill can have tons of it. So one just enough to get you high, and the other enough to, as you mentioned, stop your heart. Is that's really how it's going?
really, what happens is you stop breathing.
Oh, wow.
The main issue with the opioids is that they turn off your respiratory centers. So that's why the availability of Narcan and those kinds of things are very helpful. I mean, actually, the FDA is getting pretty close to approve Narcan over the counter, especially the nasal spray. So we're starting to move toward trying to figure out how do we rescue these people. One thing is uh, to overdose because you know what you're doing, right?
Mhm.
Meaning, I'm going to put a little more substance in the syringe, and I'm going to inject myself with heroin, either because you're suicidal or because you're chasing a higher high, if you may. Uh, Kind of an oxymoron there, but the reality is that with fentanyl in particular, and that's why we're making it so explicit, is that you don't know what's in the pill. And the reason you don't know what's in the pill is that you're not buying the fentanyl that is being acquired in a pharmacy with the prescription of a doctor. Okay. That is almost non existent anymore. Very few people are prescribing the original real fentanyl. There are other options available for the management of pain, even though some people may still get the patches. And it's a patch that lasts for 24 hours. These are pills that are being probably made and formulated in places like China and India, and they're being transferred toward Mexico, okay, and Mexico to the United States. So when you are in the lab with no quality controls, you're not going to be worrying very much about the milligrams that you're putting in every pill, right? I remember a couple of years ago, kids we used to call these pills, the fentanyl pills, perks from Percocet. And
Hmm.
they used to call them perk fives because they thought there were like 5 milligrams of Percocet in those pills. But that's not what it was in those pills. If you go and steal pain medications from your parents' cabinet and they happen to have Percocet and you get a 5 milligram, you know you're getting 5 milligrams of Percocet. If you go to the corner and you buy a couple of tablets of fentanyl, one may have 5 milli equivalents of 5 milligram equivalents of Percocet. The other one is going to have 30, right?
Wow.
So that makes it very dangerous, and a lot of the overdoses that I've seen are patients who were rescued, right? That somebody was close enough, they had stopped breathing, they gave him the Narcan, and they came back. But but again, a lot of these people are not close to Narcan, not close to emergency services, and they just die.
Mm. I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong. Some of the paramedic friends I know say that a lot of the kids and the people experimenting with these type of drugs really have kind of this idea that there's that golden parachute of Narcan, that if the worst case happens, they call 911 and they're going to be rescued. That's a myth, correct?
Well, it's a myth because I mean the availability of emergency services may not have enough time for you to be rescued or to be rescued alive, right? I mean, you may be able to be rescued with brain damage. I mean, you can call that a rescue, but you're not gonna. I mean, basically, your brain is gonna be dead, but your heart's gonna be beating. So people die, but people also get brain damage from this type of situations. Remember, if you don't breathe, you don't get oxygen to your brain. It doesn't matter if the heart's pumping because the pump has no oxygen in it. So these are situations that I don't think we've seen before as much, and it's becoming more problematic. And unfortunately, uh, it's becoming a kind of a social issue. You see,
How so?
let me give you an example. Back in the 1960s and 70s, when you and I grew up, I remember the heroin addicts, right? And heroin addicts were dirty, bad people. And if they died from an overdose, people didn't care very much,
That's true. They didn't.
all right? Because that was the drug that was killing addicts, was heroin. Very few people died from cocaine or LSD or psilocybin, anything like that, MDMA. But from heroin, people would overdose, right? Then, as heroin became more mainstream, the opiate epidemic also happened, right? There was a time in the 90s, probably before the 90s, 80s, where heroin went down. There was not a lot of opiates, and then the opiate epidemic happened from the mid 1990s until the late 2000s. It was still living it, right? What happened is that the population that it started using were not the dirty people using needles. The population that started using were the middle class and the adolescent white boys, right?
Hmm.
And then the white girls, right? So it was no longer a cultural issue. Everybody was doing it, right? Just like marijuana. Marijuana eventually became uh, accepted, not only because of the science behind it, but because of the social change attached to it. So the same thing happens with drugs. Right now, I mean, I can tell you, in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot of average, middle class, white, brown, black kids that are not poor who are looking for opiates just for maintenance because they started trying it, right? And then they terrified of their withdrawals, okay? And the parents don't know their kids are using opiates
Wow.
until somebody overdoses, right? So, I mean, when they get to us and they get into the hospital, obviously we have to tell the parents because the process of rehabilitation needs to be initiated. But in reality, we have to recognize that the social compact, okay, changes with the use of drugs. as people who are more affluent, middle class, and higher class become users too,
Mhm.
right? So that's kind of a problem because it normalizes culturally the use without understanding of the risks. And fentanyl is a drug that should never be normalized
Mhm.
because unless you're going to be prescribing it from a pharmaceutical reputable pharmaceutical companies that you know what you're getting in every tablet, you should have been doing that. So that's why we're actually promoting treatments, right, that facilitate one moving them away from the fentanyl, right, and then facilitating detoxification, and in some cases maybe middle term use of other substances like buprenorphine, Suboxone, methadone, substances like that. Unfortunately, there is there's a negative perception on the part of a lot of physicians who don't work in the substance abuse arena, right, toward these substances. So if you, it was just recent that the FDA liberated Suboxone from limits on how many people can take it, right? Because there was a time where the prescriber like me, and I'm licensed to prescribe it, could only have 100 patients at a time, right?
So just for the audience, these drugs, the methadone, the Suboxone, these are the transitional drugs you use to get somebody off opioids, so that they can do so without the horrific withdrawal syndromes and symptoms, and then wean them off of all drugs to get together. Is that correct?
That is correct. Always in combination with some sort of rehabilitation, whether it's outpatient groups, support, and the different approaches to that. But we find that the use of MAT, which means medically assisted treatment, plus psychological rehabilitation, substance abuse treatment together works better than either one.
So why is it that there's a kind of a negative thought toward it? I mean, you guys in your business use it all the time. Why do other physicians kind of balk at this?
The FDA recently released all physicians to prescribe these substances, actually because of the pressure. Interestingly enough, we're in the year 2023. France did it in 1995. So that gives you an
Wow.
idea how far behind we are, right? So now any physician, any nurse practitioner, any physician assistant can prescribe Suboxone, buprenorphine. Okay. Methadone is a little more complicated because it requires a specialized clinic, a special license from the federal government. But buprenorphine is a fairly easy to prescribe medication. And now that everybody can prescribe it, if you go to the pediatrician as an adolescent and asking for Suboxone, probably won't give it to you. If you go to the family doctor, won't give it to you. They will refer you to a specialist. And the reason is that there's this perception that they don't want to prolong the addiction, that is morally wrong, right? Like you remember with heroin and methadone, right? Going to a methadone clinic, well, you're just moving into a lateral problem. The issue with fentanyl is not a lateral problem, it's a life-saving measure, right? Because you'll die.
And so, what do you think is driving this? I mean, obviously, especially in America, everybody wants to feel better. It's lack of pain, lack of suffering, chasing the dream, being happy. But what's from a societal point of view, or even maybe psychological, what's driving this addiction? Because I mean, opioids are different than pot and maybe a little bit of alcohol. These are serious substances.
Well, there are a multitude of factors. Some of them are biological, some of them are social, some of them are psychological, right? So there are certain populations that tend to be more vulnerable. For example, when you analyze the deaths of adolescents in particular in the last year, right, in terms of who died from these overdoses, approximately 40% of them suffer also from a mental disorder. So when you put those numbers together, you know that if you have a problem with depression or anxiety, you're going to be more prone to try to escape, right? So escape from your pain emotionally becomes one of the driving forces
So self-medication, essentially.
to some degree.
Okay.
So if we and then we see kids that have been neglected, who have been abused, who've been raped. I was looking at the statistics on girls recently that 2 out of 10 girls will be raped during adolescence, which is pretty
Jeez.
high. So that creates a whole trauma that people also need to escape from. COVID was actually a major issue, and that is because adolescents are not supposed to be isolated. The purpose of adolescence is freedom and independence and separation from your parents, right? That's a goal of adolescence. So if you restrict that, there's going to be conflict, right? So avoidance of conflict also becomes an issue. Sociological issues like poverty, sociological issues like abandonment, sociological issues like not having a job. So drugs are as old as humanity. We have had drugs forever, right? These are new. These are not new things. But I think that the fact that society has become much more stressed, much more distrustful, much more avoidant, okay, makes you more vulnerable to the use of drugs too.
Mm. And then you add to that the cost of the drugs, like you said, two for $1 now. A kid getting bubblegum money, what used to be bubblegum money, can literally go out and buy these things, and it's everywhere.
Well,
What?
there's also a market for this. There's a group of
Yeah.
people who brings those drugs into the United States, who makes a lot of money out of this, right? And there's a whole chain of money moving around, and this is easy to move around. I mean, if you see the tablets, they look like regular aspirin tablets,
Wow.
and multicolor, maybe with some sweeteners, some of them, so you can get younger kids and they like it. And I mean, there's a whole marketing process for this, but there's also one issue that is particularly important with adolescents, and is that adolescents are in the process of separation, and using drugs is an empowering matter, right?
Mm,
It empowers you to have something different and unique from your parents that your parents have no control over. And we have dealt with that forever. You and I were teenagers at one point in our lives, but now the problem is that the risk associated could lead to death, right? I mean, back in our day, it was we were wearing seat belts. We're riding motorcycles without helmets. We were smoking, and so there were risks. But the risk had some calculation, and the potential for death was limited. Even though I'm sure you had friends in adolescence who died, I did,
mm,
right? Car accidents, things of that sort, reckless behavior. But those were, for me, were learning experiences, right? What I'm finding out is that with these kids who have died from fentanyl overdoses or other opiate overdoses, the rest of the kids aren't learning very much.
mm,
It's almost like if they're disconnected from the death. A lot of them don't care very much about that because I hear this every day, right? I mean, I have a child in the hospital right now who, in the month of February of last year, died from an overdose. No, actually died by suicide, and this kid got into abusing some drugs, and she's still in the hospital because we're concerned that the anniversary is another time for this kid to consider life as not valuable and try to do something to herself. So you get into these situations where you have to be looking at the whole movie. But I'm starting to see a common denominator with this, and is that the value of life has changed,
mm,
right? The self-worth value has changed. So when you talk to kids, because we talk to kids every morning, when I'm talking to kids and you ask them what keeps you alive, very seldom I hear because I'm worth living for. It's always my parents, my cat, my dog, my friends. But if you turn around and say, well, is there anything about you that makes you worth living for? And I get this staring, like if I'm talking about something from out of space.
mm.
And the reality is that that has been a consequence of a lot of factors, and it's something we have to keep in mind because kids are willing to take risks that include them dying.
So what do we tell the parents? What are the signs, advice, anything? Because I know you end up seeing them after the fact. Is there anything they can do before the fact?
Yes, you have to know your kids. You don't start. I mean, right now we need to start working on the kids who are 2 or 3 years old, right? I mean, when you're trying to change behavior when they're 14, 15, 16, it becomes a little more problematic. But when you're working on the younger ones and the parents stop being afraid of the kids, then you can establish a relationship. You want to make sure that your kids respect you, love you, okay? Maybe they fear you a little bit, but at the same time, they want to communicate with you. Now that requires that we change our behavior, right?
Very much so.
And a lot of the problems that we're seeing today, whether it's on the use of drugs, education, learning, parenting, relationship between parents and schools, have to do with our own insecurity, right? So we need to get back to a point that we go back to understand purpose. What is the purpose of raising kids? It's not to show that we're good parents. It's for the kids to be well balanced individuals that have freedom. Okay. So it becomes important that parents balance, control, understanding, okay, and communication.
Well, folks, it sounds like that's always been the key term, communication. So, understand, listeners, that this is an issue. It really is a crisis. Speak to your kids. Ask them where they are on this. Ask them about the subject. Bring it up. Communicate. Have some empathetic listening, and don't judge. And then, because again, a lot of what happens, as you know, with parents, is like you said, when we don't change our behaviors, when we get angry, um, we push the kids further and further away. I know I'm very lucky. My stepdaughter and her mother made a real effort to do that, and the dad is someone she doesn't speak to. I get calls on occasion, but she's completely and 100% honest with her mother in every way. Sometimes that's terrifying, but boy, what an incredible thing to have with your child. So, parents out there, um, understand that this is real. It is dangerous, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you very much, fans. We'll see you next week. And to all of you, uh, don't look at the other podcasts we have. We have talked a lot about children, and we welcome your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.